So 1984, 1985, in that window, there is a musical earthquake that happens. Duran is Cleft in Twain. They decide to do side projects. One side of the equation, it's Nick Rhodes, Simon Le Bon, Roger Taylor. They do the kind of arty, or some might say pretentious. I'm not going to say pretentious, although they did name their first album So Red the Rose. That was Arcadia, of course. And then John Taylor and Andy Taylor joined forces with Tony Thompson, drummer, much renowned. And then at that time, a little known English singer named Robert Palmer, and they formed the Power Station, which is more of the meaty Patrick Nagel print side of things, fueled by similar things to what Dirk Diggler was fueled by in the notable scene in the early 80s from Boogie Nights. Where I'm going with this is that when I think of the name Robert Taylor, who of course is the former Inter Miami winger slash midfielder slash do everything Finnish international who recently came over to Austin FC in kind of a surprise move on Wednesday, I think of that player certainly, but I also think of three quarters of the Power Station. That is just burned in my mind. And would I rather be transported back to 1984, 1985 to see the Power Station? Yeah, maybe I would. Maybe that would be more fun for me. But having Robert Taylor on this team, I feel like having Robert Taylor on this team is good, even though we're not gonna hear any renditions of their cover of Bang and Gone Get It On.
In 1984, I was 1 year old.
Mm, okay. In 1984, I was 15, 16-year-old. So I was of kind of a target age for Duran at that time. Although I was a little bit of a metalhead with a mullet during those years, but becoming Duran curious, as it were. And great shifts happened, but that was that's that again. I mean, that's the difference between us and ages. I mean, we're contemporaries now, but it just always boggles my mind that I am so much older than many of the people that I hang out with now, including my wife.
I'm getting to learn history. You experienced it.
Emergency podcast. Better did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, oh yeah, shut up, oh yeah, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, a hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the Austin FC podcast, where we talk about all the Austin FC emergencies. Not really emergencies per se. There's a little bit of lineup question marks, which we're going to get to in a bit. I can't help but thinking, I might as well face it, you're addicted to Gam. Insufferable in my Robert Palmer Power Station puns for this week, but that is what I guess people have come to expect of me. Have you been plagued by similar 80s songs in your day-to-day existence?
Here's the thing is I was born in the early 80s. I
Mhm.
experienced the 80s as all of the best stuff of the 80s was already happening. And when I became aware of pop music, all of the best stuff that everybody loves the most was already best loved and beloved by everyone. And it was, these are the hits of the 80s, but it's the 90s now, kids. And now there's 90s stuff, but the 80s stuff was so good that
Mhm.
it really hung on. And the 80s is a decade of music. And I
Mhm.
say this is not like I wasn't your typical music kid, but to me, the legacy of the 80s is the best of 80s music hung on for a whole other decade. Those songs were
Yeah.
all still regular rotation songs on the radio through the 90s, back when the radio mattered in the way that it did in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
That's the thing that I think is most unique about that particular era of music is that it had
Mhm.
that kind of staying power that
Yeah.
there were the hits of the 70s, but the 70s was a weird decade of music. But now you're listening to Tape All Day, our classic music podcast.
Did this become a music podcast all of a sudden?
I don't
Did we
know.
transfer? Or are we still a soccer podcast? Let's be a soccer podcast.
If we make a double pivot, maybe we'll get there.
Okay. All right. Well, so Robert Taylor, that is big news of the week. Of course, that happened on Wednesday. A little bit of a surprise. Bogert as Bogart usually does, splashed with some news. I know that he had been about before, and I know that you were at the press conference on Thursday, and it sounded like this was actually something that Burrell was interested in for quite some time. If you ever want to trade Robert Taylor, let us know, because we'd be interested in trading Robert Taylor. Because again, for a while, Miami, of course, has had some roster compliance concerns, shall we say, and Robert Taylor is one of those players that could theoretically have been jettisoned to relieve those sort of roster compliance issues. Of course, does this pave the way for Kevin De Bruyne coming to Inter Miami? That would sure be annoying. But in the meantime, Robert Taylor coming to Austin. Your initial thoughts?
Something that you mentioned somewhere or another that we both chat on the internet, but I think it was, as I was thinking, here's what I bet Phil's take is on this. You kind of rolled out with this is akin to the Brendan Heinzike signing conceptually, that this money wise, talent wise, roster filling wise feels like it is a very strategically, tactically sound piece in the roster building world that has the potential to pay off as well as the Brendan Heinzike signing has. And I completely agree. And to me, this is a guy who has not been getting minutes at Miami, which isn't about him not being a quality player. It's that Miami is stacked the way that it's stacked. And he was an inherited piece. And look, that's when you get a new manager, this is a thing that happens. A very talented guy who is not retirement age, but who knows what he's doing, knows the league, and as recently as this past season showed himself to be an incredibly valuable teammate on a team that needs him. And if Miami's feeling that they don't necessarily need him and he's just a nice thing to have, Kevin De Bruyne, if that is, as everybody now assumes, the biggest open secret, along with the Messi signing, which nobody believed until it actually happened all the way, but was a similarly open secret to this Kevin De Bruyne thing. If he's coming in, yeah, you've got to move these pieces. I think that Miami fans being as salty about this on social media as they have been is a great indicator of, and not to say that Miami fans are the final arbiters of sport. That's what we have a court for. But they know that roster, they know these players, and when fans are talking about a player like this, it's for very good reason.
Yeah. And also seasoned MLS player. He's been in the league a few years. He's 30, so he's experienced, but he's not too old. Can fill in multiple positions. He can be a winger. He can be a 10 if you need him to be that. He's played pretty much all over the field. And also he is a Finnish international player, but he does not take up an international roster spot. He does have his green cards. It just makes sense in terms of, okay, we need to get to an 18th senior roster spot. We need depth. We can use experience. We can use somebody who has been in the same locker room with Lionel Messi and maybe has learned some things from him. There's a lot to like about this. I don't think that this is franchise changing in the way that Vasquez or Izuni have been perceived to be, but I think this is a good overall signing. And again, considering that we didn't think maybe that some didn't think that we were going to get to the window with any kind of moves, I felt like, okay, maybe there is one MLS veteran that is going to pop up on this roster. I thought it would be a center back, but here we are. We've got winger midfield depth now, and that's great.
You know, I feel like the center back piece is going to come. We're just not there. It could be that the center back piece is one of those things that we're looking at the summer window for. When Roto just straight up tells us some stuff, that's one thing. When he very clearly alludes to, expect something, without many details, it could be center back, could be maybe there's another midfield piece. I feel like one of either Danny Pereira or Owen Wolff might move in the summer. It is entirely possible that that happens. And the way that the stars are aligning, I'm not terribly worried about either of those, despite the fact that in Owen's case, even Andrew Wiebe, who came and watched one game in Austin, we know he actually watched one game because he was here. Even Andrew Wiebe makes a point to call out Owen Wolff as one of the most talented young players in the league. I think that if the club says goodbye to him, it will be for what he's worth, not to just move him on and do that sort of thing. In addition to not doing panic signings, we have noted that Roto is very big on keeping an eye on the bottom line and what the cash position is, as it were. So, this signing, to wrap things up in a neat little bow, to me, just feels like more of the right kind of trend when it comes to the overall roster build, where the roster is built and we are seeing the cleaning up of the beveled edges of things, in addition to souping up some things now that we've got a really solid engine going.
Yeah, and then you mentioned Owen Wolf a second ago. It's been a really good year for coaches' sons.
Yeah.
Sebastian Berhalter last night in that Vancouver-Miami match, that was
Incredible.
incredible. That was such a fun game to watch, by the way. I stayed up way too late to watch that, but worth it, worth it. But in the meantime, yeah, we were talking about center back and not sure what they're going to do. In the meantime, Tony Gomez short-term call-up with Brendan Hines-Ike out with a dubious second yellow card from last week's Galaxy game. Clearly a low light of what was otherwise a sometimes frustrating, but ultimately enjoyable match, but a little weird at the end with all the fighting going on,
Yeah,
all over the place. We got a pretty good view of that from the press box, just seeing everything unfolding, seeing, Bucari's long embrace of countryman Joseph Paintsel, who was losing his damn mind out on the field.
Yeah, and apparently shouting toward the supporter section to meet him outside, which he kept doing as he was literally getting dragged down the tunnel.
Yeah. Cash me outside. How about
some of the stuff that I saw through the grace of my binoculars, angles not shown on the broadcast. I should mention one of the most visible angles not shown on the broadcast was either of Brendan Hines-Ike's yellow cards, which is why the commentators didn't mention it, because they didn't see it.
That was frustrating.
Yeah, I could probably do a whole episode about my frustrations with this season and them going all remote with the commentator teams. But that is, like I said, that is a whole episode worth of gripes that is bundled with ongoing issues. That isn't to say that I don't like a lot of things about MLS Season Pass, but the things that annoy me a whole lot. But among the things that I saw that were not caught on the broadcast, were not necessarily reported elsewhere, was Galaxy coach Greg Vanney, his head swiveling as if on a pole the moment he caught Guilherme Biru's visage and saying something to him, which Biru told me in the locker room was you, which might have been you, it might have been with another expletive or any combination of other things. But Biru was excited like a kid who went to Legoland for the first time to tell me what it was this guy said. He saw me, and there's only so much communication that he and I can have across the language divide. But he knew that the top thing on my mind that I would want to talk to him about was whatever that was. And whatever it was, whatever the exact deployment of the expletive was, Biru lives in Greg Vanney's mind rent-free for life.
Right.
And the legend building of the dirtiest tackle in MLS history, Ricky Puig could have been killed, is just so over the top, it beggars belief. And I think that hilarious, maybe it's the Mandela effect. Maybe it is just they have decided that they saw something in the moment, which literally did not happen. And we have seen multiple camera angles in slow motion to prove that it didn't happen. Greg Vanney having it out for a player and directly provoking him on the field. Nico Estevez had to intercede and pull Greg Vanney away, and Vanney was still just going at it and just trying to get Biru to come over at him. I don't know what kind of professional Greg Vanney needs to talk to about that, but that struck me as just odd. And then I started watching that Onside miniseries about the league, and I went, okay. I'm seeing more unfiltered Greg Vanney, and now this makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, but this is the frustration of a man who hasn't won 9 games this season.
Yeah.
Any of the 9 games this season they played. So, and also maybe it had something to do with the 30 seconds after that dirty tackle, that moment being celebrated in tifo form, lifted up above the stadium before things started. Maybe a little bit of a reminder about, this guy did this. And
who's to say?
He's right there. He's right there. We like that moment enough to put it on an amazing tifo.
The thing, and we haven't even talked about the actual reveal of the tifo yet, but I think this is as good a time as any to take a minor tangent to it. I think that centralizing that image for this particular game was tactically one of the most deft moves that the fan base has done, because it definitely got under his skin. It got under his skin that it was celebrated, that it was exalted by this fan base. The fans got into the mind of Greg Vanney before the players had an opportunity to do anything. And that's a testament to the judiciousness of the fans, the gigantic amount of work that went into that, but also just how much of a hair trigger that guy is on after 9 losses and setting the wrong kind of record. That particular moment with Bidu is something that became iconic in the moment and since, in the same way that the Eric Cantona kick was. That it was a statement of sorts that got under people's skin on the opposing side. That in the young history of this club is something that it's iconic and vibrant for them. It's the kind of thing that they want to celebrate, that they want to further make indelible the iconography of it. And if it gets that much under the skin of the opposing coach, they're doing the job. This is a young fan base going after exactly the kinds of impulses that you want to see from a team many decades older.
Yeah, it's kind of a young, scrappy, and hungry moment if you want to borrow from Hamilton there. We're not throwing away a shot, right? Okay.
Indeed.
So speaking of not throwing away our shot, we've got a first Copa Tejas match against Houston on Saturday. In Houston, you're going to be able to make your way down to H-Town for that, into the sometimes sauna that is Shell Energy Stadium. And we're learning that Brandon Vasquez also might be out with illness. He is questionable for this match. If that happens, I assume we're going to see Azuni as a center forward and see both Obrian and Bukari as the wings, and could be a kind of a curious match if we don't have them both in, but maybe also that kind of answers one of the questions of, okay, how is it if we maybe don't have Uzuni and Vasquez on top of each other during a game? Something they tried to remedy, I think, with 4-3-3 last week, and I think worked to a certain degree. But again, still, the finishing obviously needs to be better. Got to ask Uzuni about the bicycle kick and wishing the goal was 6 inches taller in the locker room. And that's up on my Instagram. He had an expression, that's courtesy of We at Austin TV. They filmed me asking that. And he had just a priceless expression that just, again, and my wife thought it was mean. It's like, no, I was being sympathetic. I was like, I was with him in this moment. I was feeling the frustration, but clearly he wants to score these goals.
Oh yeah.
He obviously wants to score these goals. And he's a little bit torn up about not being able to deliver what I think would have been a truly iconic moment. But still, 1-0 win. We like that. Just kind of thinking ahead to Houston. Thoughts going into that one?
Something that I have been doing is taking Nico Estevez at face value when he says things about tactics, because demonstrably he follows through on it. If he's being evasive, then he's not telling us something for a reason. In advance of the previous match, he was a little bit evasive about strategic tactical decisions and changes and that sort of thing. And we did see some changes. We saw Osman starting on the bench instead of starting on the field, and that was unexpected. And one of the things that he said in the midweek press conference today that touches on something that he said previously is that he really underlined the fact that he wants to have a group that does not have clearly defined starters because of the match load, because he knows this league really well, because he was the name that nobody believed, but was the right name, according to Roto Burrell, is that he understands that you've got to have not just roster depth, but a different way of thinking about the roster than you would in a traditional European top flight league, where you have your defined starters. Those are the guys. Because of the road weariness that sets in, because of how short the roster is compared to what both the MLSPA would want and the players within the MLSPA would want, you have to think about things differently. And I think one of the biggest things he took from his time in Frisco is that he wanted the kind of flexibility that was also where Roto Burrell's head was at when it came to the roster build. So what I think is that even though I have the same reflexive thought, is we look and see Bukari on one wing and Obrian on the other. What if Obrian starts on the right and CJ Fodrey starts on the left?
Right. We're going to get to CJ in a second.
We will. But just touching on that, we'll come back to him, but just using it as an example of, I feel like going into the month of May, we can expect to see some things that we don't necessarily expect, because we've gotten accustomed to that kind of fixed starter thing. Because he mentioned it on Thursday, again, that's where my head is going, is that
Right.
More than once this season, people have been surprised by the way that the team sheet has played out. And I think that's going to continue to go that way. And
Right.
people will be like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, this is what they started on Wednesday. Why aren't they starting this on Saturday? And why this is who they started last Saturday. Why aren't they starting this on Wednesday? I feel like there is going to be that kind of flexibility. And it is something that I'll put the stake in the ground that if they have made the right gamble on that with the right combination of players, what it is built to do is to give Austin better longevity going through the whole season and potentially a deep Open Cup run, which they do appear to be very serious about.
Yep.
Where they have better legs to be able to deal with that than teams that we're already seeing getting worn out by being in CONCACAF Champions Cup, some teams that are going to be in Club World Cup, and some teams like Vancouver that are playing out of their minds right now. Top of the league, if you ask me, not just the West, based on the way that they played against Miami last night.
Yeah.
But they're going to end up with an availability report like Houston's looks, which I just sent over to you by text. So take a look at Houston's availability report. And what I am thinking is that we are going to see some unconventional, unexpected choices over the next 4 weeks. Yeah, that was exactly the response I thought I would get.
Oh my God. They got a lot of players out.
They do. I feel like the future-proofing plan, the baked-in plan from the outset, this is not something I think they pivoted to. This is something I think they were thinking about at the end of last year, was that for Austin to seriously challenge for MLS Cup, for Open Cup, in all competitions they find themselves in, they have to be able to handle the stamina drain that this league and this calendar is. So that's that's my piece. Is I don't even want to put too many bets on things, but I just wanted to throw out an example of something unexpected that people will be like, wait a minute, what is this? Why isn't this like this? And in EAFC 25, I did this.
Taylor obviously isn't going to be able to work into things, I think, till probably about a week. I think Estevez said on Thursday that he was in Miami. Like he went back to take care of some stuff, it sounds like.
He went with them to Vancouver.
But just didn't play.
Right.
Yeah, that's travel.
That is.
Miami to Vancouver to Miami and then back to Austin. Logging those miles, getting those frequent flyer miles. But yeah, I mean, I could see, and again, I think based on Bucharest's play last week that he's gotten himself back into good graces to get a start. So maybe it is Fodrey on the left and Bucharest on the right. If you try to deploy Bucharest on the left, I think that's problematic, and I'm hoping that that doesn't happen. But again, you've got Fodrey who can function as an inverted left winger. You've got Ozuni who could play nominally as a central forward, but it could also drift out wide. If you have Owen Wolf in there, of course, he can drift out wide as well. And then you have ostensibly Pereira and or Sabovic who can play largely centrally. Yeah, I think there's some really interesting things they could do against Houston. And given that half the team seems to be lower body questionable right now, it could be a depleted Houston side, a team that has already won 4-4 on the season, and things are looking kind of dicey in Houston right now. Like they just got Linger, so I think that's going to be something, and we're going to get up a little bit here. Some thoughts from BioCity Soccer. We did a foreign exchange with them. My thoughts on Austin is up. They asked me a lot more questions than 3, but I answered them all.
Generosity. The generosity of Phil
exactly. But they're pretty hyped on Linger and trying to see how he fits with McGlynn. I think it's going to be good, but they've got, clearly they've got some issues, mainly goalkeeper, where Andrew Tarbell was pegged as their starter, and then he, of course, had the season-ending knee injury, and then they've just had some issues since then. It's been pretty sketchy for them. This is another winnable game, again, like we've talked about.
Let me roll through this real quick for those who aren't necessarily looking at this right away. Tarbell mentioned already out. 5 other guys out: Quinones, Ortiz, Olusanya, Holmes, and Inali. And then 5 guys questionable. 5 guys questionable, in addition to 6 guys out. How many people do they have on their roster? That's 11 guys. That's 11 guys. Are they calling up like 3 different guys from their second team? Maybe, I don't know. But you've got Bartlow, Kowalczyk, Maurer, Svachenko, and Urso all questionable.
Yeah, there's just some key pieces as defenders or D mids. Their attack is largely intact at this point right now. You put a journeyman goalkeeper in front of a makeshift backline, and that's a recipe for possibly scoring some goals, maybe more than one. Although this is Austin FC in 2025. So,
Well, I was going to say,
what are the odds of that?
I was going to say questionable back line. Just that one piece is one thing, but pairing that with not your ideal goalkeeper, is it going to be Golasso Fest for the first Copa Tejas match for Austin this season? It might be the kind of thing where, you know, whatever malady Vasquez is dealing with, he might be trying to get himself real well because he can smell those goals cooking. We could finally see it happen. I was optimistic about this fixture already based on having watched the Galaxy Dynamo game, in which Dynamo should have absolutely ran all over Galaxy. Should have absolutely massacred.
Especially with the red card.
Even without the red card, should have run all over them. But with the red card, it should have been like a 6-0 game.
Red card a half hour in.
A half hour
like
in.
They were up a man for an hour of that game.
Sure didn't look like it. It sure didn't look like it.
It did not. No, it did not. Absolutely not.
That injury report that looks like a CVS receipt. Oh my God.
Right.
I'm telling you, like I said about the previous match, Austin's got to win this. Austin not winning this. Something is very seriously wrong. Nothing from what I've seen says to me that something is seriously wrong based on who they've got available, what they're capable of doing, especially with this busted apart roster that Dynamo has available. That's 11 guys.
I am predicting 1-0 wins unless I am proven otherwise, because that is what this team does. We're going to get into this in a little bit here when we get into talking about field tilt and what they've done on the offensive end. They are sort of a perplexing team in that this year, just because kind of a little teaser. Landon mentioned this on Moon Tower on Tuesday. They're on pace for 60 points and 26 goals, which is my new favorite stat at this point in the season. Because again, that's pretty absurd, right? That they can be one of the top teams in the West with one of the lowest goal scoring outputs in MLS history, if that stands. I don't think that's going to stand. I do think that they're going to score more goals than that, but we shall see. And I mean, again, like you're saying, maybe it is a Golazo Fest here in Houston on Saturday. They've got to score a first, and then they've got to score a second. And that's been a real challenge for them this year.
They have a 29-man roster at present.
Okay.
11 guys out or questionable.
Okay, so they can still field an 18, but just barely if none of those players can play.
They can field exactly an 18. They can field exactly 18 players.
Oh God. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's a match day 20, right? So not to be confused with Matchbox 20. We're weaving in this line between being a music podcast and a soccer podcast. All right. I want to talk about CJ Fodrey. We got news very recently before we decided to start recording. Good for us putting this at the end of a work day on a Friday as we do. CJ Fodrey is signed to an extension. The 2+2 contract guaranteed through the end of the 2027 season with options for 28 and 29. The 21-year-old came, of course, in the first round of the 2023 MLS Super Draft, 13th overall pick, but is Generation Adidas. He is going to stay with that supplemental Generation Adidas designation, which to me is the most important, exciting part of this. Because again, with Fodrey, I think we're still seeing him develop. I don't know what he's necessarily going to become, but to have that opportunity to continue to see him develop and continue to be able to work on that directly, and then have him locked up for a long time in case he does blossom as maybe this contract indicates that they're expecting him to, but at the same time, he still has all the advantages that are built in with the supplemental designation and the Generation Adidas designation, which means that in terms of roster caps and all that, he's a very roster friendly piece. And again, that also indicates to me that maybe we're going to see more of him. Like if they're committing to this kind of signing, maybe they want to see a little bit more of him.
He's a young player with potential. He's somebody that you definitely want to have as a dealing piece, even if he ends up not working for the overall project you're working on. He's got the right profile for it. He's hungry. He goes and works like a beast in the off season. This is good business. This is making sure that the larder's full. And wherever things go over this next 2+2, solid choice, solid move. And just what we've seen over the last couple of years of him bouncing between the first team and the second team and winning a championship with the second team, he's right to call it out in the press release. It's something that he should be proud of, as many things as people might want to say about third division soccer. He is a standout, and he has earned his spot on the first team roster for 1,000 very good reasons. He found that maturing
Yeah.
step. He found that great leap he needed to take to not just be theoretically capable of it, but show that you can put him in a first team MLS match and completely hang with everybody.
I do feel like his second team days are over or just about over. But again, we have this Robert Taylor signing, so that does confuse things a little bit. But again, yeah, to your point earlier, maybe that does mean that either Wolf or Pereira are on the way out. And this is a thought about what Austin's going to do the whole season and not just what Austin's going to do to fill that 18th roster spot and get through this glut of May games, which, as we've alluded to earlier, includes that first Open Cup match on May 7th against El Paso here in Austin on Wednesday night, and then possibly another Open Cup match later in the month, should they win that one against whoever the winner of Houston Dynamo Phoenix Rising is. And I believe if that match is against Houston, assuming that Austin advances, that is here. If it's against Phoenix, it is in the Valley of the Sun.
Yep. Yes, indeed. And just momentary mention of that Open Cup draw. I feel like that is about as ideal of a draw as Austin could have hoped for, with the exception of the fact that they might have to play Houston twice inside of 4 weeks, because how much more busted up are they going to be 3 weeks from now?
Right. Yeah. Is that a bad thing?
Yeah. Is it a bad thing? Is it a bad thing? Yeah. You know what? Maybe they should be looking forward to that as a possibility. But let's be honest, Houston is not going to win that game.
No, probably not. We'll see. They are defending Open Cup champ pretty recently, so they do know their way around the Open Cup. It's a tricky time for that team. And again, they could right the ship, but 1-4-4 right now. If we think about coaches and hot seats, we were predicting Phil Neville, Caleb Porter. With Neville, definitely, I think he has kind of coached himself out of danger. New England isn't as bereft as maybe people feared that they would be. I wonder if that kind of shifts, and I wonder if Ben Olsen is in any danger right now. Instead, seems pretty tight with him. It's been a really strange start to the season for Houston, but when you're 1-4-4, that's not good.
It is not. It is not.
All right. So I want to, speaking of teams that confound people, I want to get into, for our last little segment here today, talk a little bit about the power rankings that MLS has been doing, where Austin has been in various stages of that mediocre tier, I would say. And they are currently 10th, even though they are 7th in Supporters Shield standings, and even though they are 2nd in the West. And what MLS said about them, our friend Sam Jones is writing these. He is not the sole arbiter of this. He has very little to do with the actual voting. He just reads the tea leaves on these. So he said, switch to a 4-3-3 sit-up and a visit from the Galaxy is all Austin needed to get back on track after the week's performance against Vancouver. Vasquez's tap-in gave Austin a much-needed 1-0 win. Only two teams in the West have scored less often, but Austin are still sitting second in the conference. And therein lies the paradox that we try to visit a little bit on Thursday. I started it on Tuesday, and then the Taylor signing happened, and it's been a very busy week for me. But yeah, so looked at some numbers, and it was pretty interesting just looking at what they're doing in the final third, what they're doing in getting the ball to the final third. And one of the things that really jumped out to me is, okay, so field tilt is the statistic. If you didn't see the article, basically you look at all the passes in the final third and you look at the proportion of those, right? So if you have 30 passes in the final third, your opponent has 20, that is 60% field tilt in your favor, meaning that, again, an indicator of dominance in the same way that possession is, in the same way that XG is, that it's a piece of the puzzle. It's imperfect, but it gives you an idea of what an offense is doing in terms of putting the ball into the areas in which teams typically score, which is obviously a good thing to do. So in that Colorado match, way back, the third match of the season, Austin had 50% field tilt exactly. And they have not reached that since, which has been confounding. But in the meantime, they have been 4-1-1 in that stretch as well, which is crazy kind of to think about. And again, they haven't been possessing like they did last year. There are still some worrying statistics, and you can look into the article to see some of that, right? So again, they are underperforming in terms of their XG and their XAGs. There's definitely things that they are doing to set themselves up, and they're just not finishing, which of course the eye test is telling you. There's still obviously things that they could be working on. Esteves talked a little bit about that. Again, he came with the humans want what they can't have or don't have expression, right? You can't be a complete defensive team and then be an offensive juggernaut at the same time. Where do you fall on this? Just the paradox that is Austin FC right now.
Well, one of the things that I liked about reading the piece, look, my bias is clear. I like what Phil writes, is that looking at tilt is when it comes to stats that are worthwhile. I go a little bit over the top sometimes, talking about stats. I don't care about stats. For me, it's all about context. And what I like about looking at tilt in this context is that we're looking at, they're putting up the wins. How are the wins happening? And looking at the context of one stat versus another, it's they're not scoring any goals. They're second in the West with a negative goal differential. How's that possible? However it's possible, that's what tilt is looking at. The thing for me is you mentioned earlier that you're just buckling in for a bunch of 1-0 wins. And apologies to people with other inferior English club preferences, but it's where 1-0 to the Arsenal came from. It was a bunch of wins, but not with just giant piles of goals. One of the things that has led to difficulty in soccer catching on for some Americans who want to see home run after home run and that kind of thing, it just doesn't always work that way. And you can have a very, very successful team that is squeaking out the win very competently and capably and professionally. And for me, the excitement is in looking at the way that it is happening. And getting used to clenching is not something that I think anybody is necessarily looking forward to as what to look forward to for the whole season. But boy, the release of a cup at the end of a season full of clenching is something that does end up assuaging those kinds of issues. You get into it in a more detailed way than I would regurgitate to people, but I think it's an important way of looking at where things are working and where, to me, the trend lines are going. They are doing a lot of things really, really well that I'll pick out the thing that I mentioned on the last episode that I got wrong. I was looking at Kubas and I was like, this guy's stats aren't looking so good. He's not playing so great. And then I saw the way that he played very vividly and up close. And I was like, oh, this is why he is doing so well. And this is part of why Vancouver's doing so well. It doesn't show up in the bare stats of key passes and that kind of thing, but it's what he is actually functionally doing that you can't as easily numeralize. I think that is, it's not a 1-to-1, but it's the same kind of contextually trying to figure out what it is that's going well, what could be going better, and what areas there are signs of steady improvement. It's frustrating. It's unsexy. It's not the super funnest thing in the world, but it's where Austin is doing a lot of things right.
Yeah. There's a weird inverse from 2024. Like the first part of 2024, they were not getting a lot of shots, but they were extremely efficient with the shots that they were getting. So that kept them in things for a while. We obviously know like how the season worked out, and the first part of the season was quite atrocious. Obviously, not much chance creation at all, but they were getting better at it, and then they were at least efficient with the few shots that they were getting. Looking at the chart from this week, and again with Sebastian Bush, the way that they're breaking things down is there's a rating of great, good, average, and poor chances. So Austin had 6 of their 16 chances either great or good. 3 great, 3 good out of their 16 shots. And then they, of course, had 6 on target. Galaxy had 13 shots, and Galaxy had 4 shots on target, but only 1 chance was good. No chances were great. 3 were average, 9 was poor. So part of what Austin's doing is being able to force teams, I think, into those not great chances, right? So either teams are rushing because of the pressure, or Austin is defending in ways that is, getting those, in the case of the Galaxy, to not really have favorable chances, not a lot of those within the game. And we did see some dangerous moments from the Galaxy, but we did see Austin able to negate quite a bit of that throughout the game.
Yeah, we keep saying it, and we will be so happy to be able to stop saying it. But once Austin finishes those good chances that they're creating, a lot of these concerns are going to go away. A lot of these kinds of, what? Come on, give it to me. When the fans finally get that thing that they keep saying they want the most, that is the ridge that they've got to crest. And they're real close. And you can hear it in Brendan Vasquez's voice every time he's asked, how did you feel about the win? And he is like, I should have done better. I should have done this. I should have finished this. I should have gotten that. This weekend can be an important turning point for the club, for the story of their season. And we're just over 24 hours from kick as we say this. It's got to be the opportunity that they make happen. It's got to be It's got to be the killing blow, decisive victory in whatever form that takes, because the way that some of these officials have been calling these games, and this isn't, I only have issues with the refs in Austin games. I have issues with a lot of the refs across the whole league where I'll just flat out say it. That Heinz Ike double yellow felt to me like a retributive act from a referee who was tired of hearing him do his job as captain while he had the armband on. And seeing similar things like that across the league, they can play really well, but sometimes just the wrong game management from a young ref is something that can turn an entire thing on its head. What I hope and expect most that is not something like tilt that you can't put on the sheet is the way that Nico was running around and playing diplomatic peacemaker in the mass confrontation phase of the game against Galaxy. Keeping cool heads is equally important to everybody showing up in the form that they are capable of and that we've been told they've had on the practice pitch. That, to me, that is the thing that if we see that decisive victory, if we see the resulting goals and great joy and cathartic moment that everybody wants, it'll be equally credit to keeping their heads cool against a team that loves getting spicy with them.
Yeah. And so with the refs, you're saying that the refs maybe have a little bit of main character syndrome?
Look, you said it, not me, but I would say it again.
You know who you're agreeing with? Phil Neville.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Phil Neville. My least
Yes,
favorite
you are.
Phil in a sample size of 2. Yes, my least favorite Phil. I knew exactly where you were going, and I was like, the momentum's already there. I can't steer out of it. It's already happening. You're making me agree with Phil Neville.
No, you can't. It happens, you know.
Well,
You know?
what else do we got,
Stuck
Phil?
clock is right twice a day, right?
Yeah.
I think that's it. I'm looking forward to the match, of course. Oh, you know what we got to do?
What do we
We
got?
got to talk about an away party. You, of course, are going to be in Houston, but I have the option of going to Brutorium. Like all other Austin watch party venues, it seems. Brutorium is 8 minutes from my house. Not a lie. Southern Heights was also 8 minutes from my house. Let's talk about this party and what people have to look forward to.
The watch party is going to be at the Brutorium Brewery and Kitchen, 6015 Dillard Circle A in Austin, 78752, in case you need to make sure that the zip code matches up based on whatever map app you're using. Party starts at 6:30. The match kicks off an hour later. Some important points to maybe get you out of the house instead of just watching it at home. Watch it with a bunch of your fellow Verdes, people who didn't want to get on the bus or otherwise drive out to Houston, but who will have plenty of vim and vigor to watch one of the big in-state rivalries. Big indoor screen that's going to show the match. They're going to have some food and drink offerings. Their Bat City Blonde Ale, their Verde queso and chips, and it's National Pretzel Day, Phil. Are you going to partake of one of their tasty soft pretzels on National Pretzel Day? Are you going to be a true patriot, Phil?
If I'm there, I'm definitely going to have a pretzel. Absolutely. Yeah. If the address is kind of nebulous, obviously you can map that, but also it is essentially right across the street from ACC Highland campus, and it's right down the street from the train. So if you don't mind, like maybe a 5-10 minute walk, you could actually take the train there and back.
And there you go. If you really want to party hard and not have to worry about catching an Uber home or being driven or something, you're right there close to the Red Line.
Or a Waymo.
Oh, God, not a Waymo. For the love of God. Don't bring up Waymo.
My son was in a Waymo for like the first time yesterday. And
I'm glad he survived. So. Look, taking his life.
Yeah, me too.
All right. So high likelihood that Phil partakes in a pretzel for National Pretzel Day. Phil, will you also throw an axe? Because they've got axe throwing.
I may throw an axe. Depends on how the game goes.
Okay, depends on how the game goes. Like many or most of the venues that Los Verdes uses for these watch parties, free parking, and it is all ages. So bring the family, come hang out and have fun out at Brutorium tomorrow night.
Not sure that your kids can throw axes.
Probably not. Probably not allowed to sign the release themselves, and they probably won't even let you as their guardian sign the release, but they can watch you throw axes, and then they can look forward to something that they can earn and grow up to do over time.
Maybe it depends on how big your kid is. Like if you're Jackson Bentley, you can probably handle an axe. If you're my daughter, definitely not.
Look,
Don't
I
do
don't know.
that.
I don't know that any child is the size of Jackson Bentley. That kid's a giant. Breaking
Right.
news: I hear that he is the new Green
Yes, he is.
Giant on the can. He got a new gig, and you know what? He's just going to skip
nice.
college. Before we go, Phil, one last thing that I did want to mention, something that we couldn't talk about before the TIFO reveal. We did mention the very tragic and sudden passing of Marcos Anaya Jr., MJ, if you knew him.
Yeah.
South End fixture, very much the portrait of the next generation of Austin fans in the young history of the club. And something that we were made aware of in the waning hours before it went up is that at the last minute, just by chance, if you saw the design of the TIFO, a lot of people, what most people saw were the beautiful portraits of all the different players done by a total of 16 different artists. The element that had not been completely finished when the tragic news hit is that the detail on one leaf, there were some leaves that were decorating different parts of the net. There was one of them that didn't have the black detail lines painted on it yet. And Marcos Anaya Jr.'s name was painted on that leaf in recognition of him. If you zoom in, if you look, it's in the bottom left corner of the design. And so
that was cool.
he was with the South End one more time. And this morning that leaf was presented to his dad after the funeral mass. He wore his favorite, not everybody's favorite Austin FC jersey, the Bacon Kit, as part of his last outfit. Yeah. It's a hell of a thing. The things that you can't predict will become indelibly woven into the history of a club, of a fan base, of a life that the rest of us are getting to keep living. I'm really glad that everybody got to show up in a big way for him one last time in some ways, and in ways that I think a whole lot of us are going to carry on into infinity.
And on that front too, it was great to see Diego Sevas as the opening in that press conference post-match to acknowledge his life and his passing, and good on the club, particularly Cam Kubik, for making sure that took place. Obviously, like we talked about last week, it's a very sad, tragic thing, but to have the club honor him in that way, the club that he loved, it's a sign that, this is a good club. They're doing a lot of things right.
Yeah. We can close out on no better note than, okay, guys, 2 of you need to score hat tricks this weekend. That's all we ask. Make
2 of you.
One to remember.
Just whichever two
whichever two want to score 3 goals each. Notch some goals up for the kid.
We'll report back next week. Moisés will tell us about his time in Houston. Say hello to Josh Wolf for me if you do see him.
That is like the worst thing I've ever heard in the history of the 7 years that I've been on this planet.